Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
A senior magistrate has chosen to resign after being suspended for trying to help an asylum seeker who appeared before him. The Ministry of Justice says convicted adult offenders who use our criminal courts should pay towards the cost of running them, and that offenders can pay in affordable instalments linked to their ability. But for Nigel Allcote, the magistrate who resigned after more than 15 years in the job, it's not quite like that.
I have always been a schoolmaster, a musician, teaching, performing. And there was a time when some colleagues who were magistrates spoke to me and they asked would I consider this, and I wanted to know more about it. And it was just interesting and to see how justice was actually working in this country, and also doing, one hopes, some good as a member of society.
Was it something which took it out of you, emotionally?
Sometimes. You have to be dispassionate about things and you cannot get emotional, but you actually have to see the broader picture and be fair in all things.
It must be hard to divorce your human feelings from...
Oh, well, yes, of course, because one of the reasons why one was appointed was because you were human. And yes, you saw things which were terribly difficult to understand because people get themselves into the most terrible situations, often in those circumstances no fault of their own.
What is it about this particular individual case that ended up with you being here?
Well, the person who came before me was a asylum seeker, a bona fide asylum seeker with all his paperwork and such like. For some reason or other, he had crossed the line and had been in court earlier in June. At that point, I know that he was given a victim surcharge, which was levied on the particular sentence that he was given. This was paid by a member of the public in Leicester who befriended him, and we thought this was a wonderful gesture, and it actually lifted our spirits. But then we hear that there is no way that he can pay this court charge because as an asylum seeker, you have no finance, you cannot work. You have a card, which is like a top-up card, of £35 a week, which has to be used, not for getting money, but for essential things from shops which are designated.
This person couldn't pay the fine. What was the fine?
Well, it wasn't actually a fine.
Right.
It's what's called a court charge.
Right.
And it is something that came about from April by the government. It came in a week before the election, and it came under the radar, and nobody knew anything about it. And it is rather draconian that everybody that goes to court now, whether they plead guilty, is in fact going to be charged £150 upwards to over £1,000. And this has to be paid, it's mandatory, unlike any fine which is part of a sentence, which is actually based upon a means form.
But this is imposed upon you.
This is absolutely imposed, and we have no way of dealing with it. It has to be dealt with.
And it sounds like you had your qualms about this when it was introduced. Why are you a former magistrate?
I resigned when I was to be investigated for some action that happened in my home court in Leicester the other week. And I found that instead of the administration of the Justice Department there and elsewhere in formulating some new strategy to deal with the situation of an asylum seeker who was in court, unable to pay a court charge, I found that I was the person that was lampooned for creating a way out of an impasse, actually, because of this person.
So what did you offer to do?
Well, I reached into my shirt pocket where there was a few notes, and I thought, well, if we could actually get this person off the computer system as a fine defaulter, because although this was a court charge, it's still called a fine default. I thought, well, at least we would stop him having to come to court. And seeing a rather ridiculous side of the country to which he wished to be a member of through his asylum seeking. And so,
what was his reaction, by the way?
Well, it wasn't actually noted, for the simple reason that our clerk in the court suddenly jumped up and asked the bench to retire immediately, with me still clutching my money. And we had to retire while she sought further advice.
But I take it somewhere along the line, given that you were suspended.
Well, I was asked to not sit, in other words, to be suspended while I was investigated by the Lord Chancellor's Advisory Committee.
You weren't prepared to do that? You chose to resign instead?
I did, yes.
Why?
Because I had to write down exactly my stance on the matter when we should have sat round a table to talk about it and formulate some common purpose for the future when this would happen. And everybody was just concentrating on my action, and I felt, well, I found it unjust that I should be lampooned for doing something which I passionately thought was going to be right in that circumstance.
Do you agree that it's possible that your action was loving, humanitarian, caring, kind, wonderful, while at the same time as being, in terms of your role as a magistrate, unprofessional and wrong?
At the point of that time, no, I didn't think so, and still
don't. But now, do you think those two things can be true?
No. There comes the point when you look back and think, why was I appointed? It was a great honour, and you swear the oath. You're part of something dating back to Runnymede, and we are part of this over 800 years, and it is the backbone of our society. And if it's watered down or you miss a vertebrae in it, it's going to collapse. And I think compassion, some human injection into our society, as opposed to total rules and regulations, they need to be reassessed in unique situations.
That's former magistrate Nigel Allcote.
Robert Came, a criminal defence solicitor, is talking to one of his clients outside Highbury Magistrates Court.
Karen, at the end of your case, you've already pleaded guilty. There's a possibility that you might be going to prison, which you know all about. But one of the other main problems is that whether you go to prison or not, you'll have to pay certain new government charges. A criminal court charge, which will be between £150 or £180, because you pleaded guilty.
Yeah.
And in your case, it'll be £180.
Yeah.
Plus, you'll also have to go and pay prosecution charges, quite possibly.
And maybe I might have to pay the victim compensation as well. But woman, you're the solicitor, brief.
And of course, do you think you'll be able to pay that when you get out of prison?
No chance.
And why is that?
I won't pay it. I don't have to pay it because they won't chase me up. They never do.
And if you pleaded not guilty, that you may, if you were found guilty, you'd have to pay £1,000 on top of all the other punishments.
Yeah.
So how would you be able to pay £1,000 if you lost a trial?
Well, I wouldn't pay it. I wouldn't be able to.
And what happens if the government tried to force you to pay it?
Well, they can't, because when I'm put in prison, they automatically stop my benefits. So how can I pay any money that when I haven't got any benefit going into my account anyway? When they come out, it takes 6 weeks before you even get like £54 to last you. You've been out for 6 weeks out of prison. Of course, you're going to turn back to crime to earn money. This is the whole thing about it, because they know you're going to go round in a circle and you're going to go, boss, I've got no dole money, I've got nothing to live on, boom, I'm going to go back to crime. It's just a never-ending circle. It's a nasty, vicious circle.
The criminal court's charge was introduced in April to shift some of the burden of supporting the courts from taxpayers to offenders. We've not been able to find out how much money the charge has raised so far. First, our Freedom of Information request was rejected, and then we were told that the figures would be released next month anyway. But it's not just defendants who don't like the criminal court's charge. Bernard Hunter has served as a magistrate in North East London for more than 12 years. He resents a law that requires him to impose the charge on all adult offenders, regardless of how poor they are and regardless of the other penalties they receive.
The level of fines and costs and so on and so forth has already been set at a level which was perceived to be just. Ergo, this must be unjust. Or they got it wrong first time round.
And Mr. Gove, the Justice Secretary, seems to be wavering slightly.
I should hope so.
Because?
Because it's potty. I mean, apart from anything else, apart from the justice of it, how much money is going to be generated? It's not going to achieve the objectives of underwriting the Ministry of Justice's costs.
Yes, because it's £150 or £180 if you plead guilty in the magistrates' court, but £520 or as much as £1,000 if you plead not guilty and you're convicted after a trial, that the higher charge applying to more serious offences that are triable either way. So even £150 must be quite a lot for some of the defendants who appear before the magistrates' court.
Yes, I mean, the practice in the past and all the guidance we've been given is that you take account of people's income, disposable income, and the principle we've always abided by is that there should be equal pain, no matter what your means are. So a rich person, the penalty should hurt them proportionately the same as a poor person. Now, in the past, we've been reasonably successful in engineering that through the guidelines, but this just drives a coach and horses through it.
And it's in addition to other penalties?
Yeah, I mean, the charges we impose are typically a fine, a contribution towards the prosecution costs, a victim surcharge, compensation maybe, and then this is a fifth one.
Some of those penalties may be adjusted according to the offender's income, but this one is a flat fee and you have to impose it even though you've already imposed these other charges.
Yes, and you're not allowed to reduce the other charges in the light of imposing this one either.
And it's more expensive if you plead not guilty and are convicted after a trial.
Yes.
How do you feel about that?
Well, the obvious effect of that is that somebody who is poor, who isn't sure whether they're going to be found guilty or not, is going to be persuaded to plead guilty to avoid this charge.
But that's saving court time, and I suppose as a matter of principle, the people who appear before the courts ought to pay for the courts.
I'm not convinced by that principle, but even if you allow for that principle, the level of the charge and the lack of discretion is giving us an unjust system, a profoundly unjust system, which is targeting the poor.
Profoundly unjust because you can't adjust the level of the charge according to the means of the offender.
Yes.
This charge applies only to offences committed after the 12th of April this year, so not many of them have come through. Have any come before you?
No. I have taken 3 months' leave of absence to avoid having to be in court and hence impose this charge.
You say you've taken 3 months' leave of absence, but you're due to sit again, what, next week?
Yeah, week on Monday, I think.
And will you go to court and sit?
No.
Why not?
Because I would be expected to impose this charge, or it is likely that a case will come up with a charge needs to be imposed, and I won't do that.
Why won't you do that? It's the law.
Yeah, I'm afraid I answer to a higher authority than the law, and that's my conscience. The reason I became a magistrate was incompatible with applying this charge.
So what you're saying now is incompatible with staying a magistrate?
Yes.
You're resigning?
Yes.
On this programme?
Yes.
That's a pretty drastic thing to do just because of one law you don't like.
The law is a fairly blunt instrument, and there are a number of times where you find yourself imposing a sentence which you think, well, you know, is that quite right? It's inevitably a blunt instrument. It's got to cover the whole spectrum. And, you know, we're real people. We understand that. But this is so systemically unjust that it just goes beyond the boundaries of anything else that one might not like.
And what about magistrates like you? How do you feel about being forced to resign over this change in the law and give up an occupation that obviously means a lot to you.
Yeah, I'm quite angry about that, but, I have to do what I have to do.
Bernard Hunter, resigning here on Law in Action from his unpaid post as a magistrate. We asked the Ministry of Justice to respond, but no minister was available.